So the objectives of today's lecture would include to understand the communication process, to understand how advertising is a means of communication, and to know the characteristics of communication, and also to understand the various elements of communication that are means highly required while designing the effective communication. So first of all, we need to understand what is a consumer communication, and then we'll talk what is actually a communication, and then we'll talk about the process of communication, and so on. So consumer communication is a tool that marketers use to persuade consumers to act in a desired way, such as to vote, to make a purchase, to patronize a retail store. So, consumer communication is an effective tool. It is a tool that can be used to push somebody to perform some action. And in case of marketing communication, when we are advertising something, our objective could be to means push them to purchase a particular product which we are advertising, or when it is the advertising we are doing is a political advertising, it will urge the people to vote for that particular party. So nowadays you might be seeing the in Punjab we are seeing a number of parties, they are advertising themselves as the potential candidates for the next elections. So means they are means putting their right things before the people just to uh, persuade them to vote for them later on. So communication evokes emotions that put consumers in a more receptive frame of mind. What happens when we see some communication, any communication, when we are, I mean, communication is anything where message is being passed on from one message, or information is being passed on from one person to another person. So whenever communication is happening, what is actually happening is that it is evoking our emotions. When we are listening to somebody, when we are listening to somebody who is telling us something, then our emotions are evoked, and what happens is our mind becomes more receptive. So we'll receive the message in more effective manner. Now we need to understand what actually communication is. As per the definition given by Louis Alien, communication is the sum of all the things one person does when he wants to create understanding in the mind of another. So, communication is sum total of each and every effort put in by someone when they want to uh, create understanding in the mind of other. So, means whenever they want to convey something to the other person, and they want them to understand in the same manner in which they have conveyed the message to them. So, every effort put in by them will be counted as the communication, and it basically involves systematic and continuous process of telling, listening, and understanding. So this is a systematic, means it is a step by step process. Okay, so you will understand it better when we'll be doing the model of communication. So therein you will come to know that actually it is a step by step process, and it is a continuous process. It doesn't then mean that we'll communicate with somebody only once during the lifetime. So we keep on communicating with different people. So similarly, advertising keep on changing from time to time. So it is a continuous process that involves telling, it involves listening, and it involves understanding. So this is the communication. Now, next is the characteristics of communication. So communication is to tell, to inform, to show, or to spread information. So from this, you can have the idea of the objective of communication. So communication can be done in order to just to tell someone something, or to inform them, or to show them, to give demo of something, or to spread information among masses. It is referred to as an inter-exchange of thought and informations. Inter-exchange means exchange between two parties, wherein both are exchanging some information with each other. So they are exchanging their thoughts or they are exchanging their information with each other. So that's why it is an inter-exchange. So it is a two-way traffic. So when means communication is considered to be a one-way communication when feedback is missing. So, but when we receive feedback from the receiver, then it becomes a two-way communication. So means whenever means we get some information back from the receiver that how he had understood what he has understood, then this is a two-way communication, and we can easily make any communication a two-way communication by making it attractive or by inviting the feedback from the receiver. So it is a continuous process. So communication will never end. So because it goes on, people once communicated with somebody will communicate with that person again for some other reason, for passing on some other information. It will never end. It's not like that once we have communicated and then we'll never communicate with that person again. It is a short period process. So means communication, communicating doesn't take much of your time. We have to design a message and then we have just to pass on that message to the receiver through some channel of communication, through some medium, and so it will take very less time. So that's why we just cannot say that communication is a long process that takes a huge amount of time. It is not like that. It is a process of conveying messages by adopting different medias of communication. So, this particular point highlights the importance of using the media. So, for communicating with somebody, we may use the different medias. In case of person to person communication, we may communicate personally, wherein we are speaking verbally. We are passing on verbal message to somebody sitting next to us. But when we are not at one place, we want to communicate. We can communicate through a voice call or through a video call or through video conferencing. So there could be different mediums that could be used for conveying the message to one person. So this is the communication process. So communication process starts with sender sending the message to the channel. So now this channel could be any channel. In case of advertising, the channel used could be the So in case of advertising, the channels or the media we could use is the television, or it could be the print media. We may make use of the newspapers, journals, magazines, or we can make use of the pamphlets, brochures. We can make use of glow signs or neon signs. Then we can use any novelty media like skywriting or the high means high flowing balloon we could install at some particular place. So, or it could be the billboards on the roadsides, or we can use the transit media. So there are a number of options available in terms of media. So that message is being passed on to the media, and then media conveys the message to the receiver. Now, there is a feedback flowing from the receiver to the sender. So, what happens in communication process? First, the sender gets an idea what to communicate. The uh, source then can encode the message and sends the message. This message is sent through a channel that is a media. It is then received by the receiver who decodes the message and sends the feedback to the receiver of having received the messenger. So now this feedback is just a confirmation from the receiver that yes, they have received the message, and they can also add on what they have understood by that particular message. Why that feedback is important? Now, through the feedback, the sender knows that the message has been received. It is important that the message be received and convey the meaning it is intended for. Because if if the receiver receives something else, if he understood something else then what the sender has actually conveyed to them, so it will create a huge problem. So means the sender must make sure that the same message that he has conveyed to the channel, the same message is received by the receiver, so there is not any distortion in between. So to confirm that, the feedback is quite an important task. So now I'll explain it in detail. The sender. First, we'll talk about the sender. The sender is the initiator of the communication. So this sender could be a formal source or an informal source. Students, are you understanding? Yes, students.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Am I clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So the sender could be a formal source or it could be an informal source. By formal source, we mean that it could be either the for-profit or message by a for-profit organization or by some NGOs, that is not for-profit organizations. And the informal sources could be the parent or a friend who gives product information or advice. So in making purchase decisions, consumers most often they rely on informal communication sources because they have a kind of trust on the informal sources. When we receive the information through the advertising, but we feel that this is something that manufacturer wants to convey us. So we don't rely much on that information because we feel that they will never tell us uh, they'll always highlight the good points about the product and they'll never tell us about some bad things that are there in some means defaults or defects in their product. So we always rely more on the informal sources. So informal word of communication tends to be highly persuasive because consumers prefer personal information sources when they buy services because they have greater confidence in such services. For example, we want to go to a particular restaurant, we'll ask our friends who have recently visited, and if they'll give good feedback about that restaurant, we'll completely trust that and we'll prefer to go to that restaurant. Then next, this at the end, the sender is someone who initiates the communication process and receiver is the one who ends the communication process. The receiver of the formal communication is likely to be a target audience or a customer, um, the one to whom the manufacturer wants to send the message. So there are many intermediary and even unattended audiences for the marketing communication. So when we talk about the marketing communication, that is advertising, or it could be the personal selling, or it could be direct marketing or online marketing. In all those communications, the receiver is someone uh, that is the target that forms the target audience of the manufacturer for whom the product is intended to be. So, who are the intermediary audiences or the unintended audiences that the company is not focusing on? The intermediary audiences could be the wholesalers, distributors, and retailers who are sent trade advertising designed to persuade them to order and stock merchandise, and relevant professionals such as architects or physicians who are sent professional advertising in the hopes that they will specify or prescribe the marketer's products. So by intermediary audiences mean that sender need not only send the message to the receiver, that is the final consumers, they may send the message to the intermediary audience, that is the wholesaler, retailer, because if they are not advertising their product, if they are not sending information to the wholesalers and retailers, they will never stock their items in their warehouses, and if the customer will come they are only advertising to the receiver, that is the target consumers. Now consumer will come to the intermediary, that is the retailer or wholesaler, to ask about the product, but they are not aware of the product. So and then they have not they don't have that product in the stock. So that's why it is important to communicate with the intermediary audiences in case of marketing communications. So similarly, sometimes the advertising is being made to the doctors only. The medicines are being sent to them so that they can prescribe those medicines to the patients. Unintended audiences include everyone who is exposed to the message. They may not be the part of the targeted audience. So, in addition to the general public, unintended audiences often include publics that are important to the marketers. So, they may be the shareholders of the company, creditors of the company, suppliers of the company, employees, or the bankers or the local community. Yes, Maya? Maya, want to ask something?
Ma'am, the slides are not coming.
Because we are
Yes, ma'am.
just discussing this slide.
Okay,
So
okay,
we are
okay.
discussing right now, we are discussing receiver only. Earlier we discussed sender, and we'll complete these 5 components, then we'll move further. Okay?
Okay. Okay.
So,
Ma'am, can you give one example in which these 5 components come together?
so in every communication, this happens. So means whenever we are communicating, so let's say now we are communicating. So you communicated with me. So you are the sender. You said that, ma'am, slide is not passing on. This was the message. Okay, this was the message. You were the sender. I was the receiver. Okay, the channel we used is this technology.
Okay.
So this Zoom, basically this Zoom platform is the medium through which we are interacting with each other. Okay, and I immediately replied you back after receiving. Once you raised your hand, I immediately realized and I asked you. This was the feedback. So that means if you wanted to communicate something, I immediately understood, and this was the feedback. Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Next is the medium. So this is the medium. So message is always passed through some medium. So I already told you that when we talk about the marketing communications, so the channels we use could be the television, radio, or print media, or any other type of the channels that are available. So the channels can be broadly classified into 2 categories: interpersonal channels and the impersonal channels. So interpersonal is an informal conversation face to face by telephone or even by mail between 2 friends, or a formal conversation between a salesperson and a customer. Okay, so when we are talking in person, then that particular medium is called interpersonal medium. So immediately we get the response. So in case of impersonal channels are the mass medium channels such as newspapers or television programs. In these type of channels, no interaction is happening actually. So the message will be passed on to the receiver, and later on we'll receive the feedback. But in case of interpersonal communication, we immediately receive the feedback from the receiver. Next is the message. So message is the most important part of the communication, because this is something that is being transmitted from the sender to the receiver. So this message could be the verbal message, or it could be the non-verbal message. By verbal message, we mean something that is spoken or written. It can usually contain more specific product or service information than a non-verbal message. So when in a TV advertising, the features of a particular product are being spoken by the actor that is acting in that television commercial, that is called verbal message. On the other hand, non-verbal information takes the form of symbolic communication, when instead of the words, some symbols are being used, signs or symbols are being used. So making use of the symbolic language comes under the non-verbal form of the messages. So marketers often try to develop logos or symbols that are associated exclusively with their products. For example, the Coca-Cola company has trademarked both the word Coke in a specific typographic uh, style and shape of the traditional Coke bottle. So both are instantly recognizable to the consumers as symbols of the company's best-selling soft drink. So wherever we see this Coke written in red color, we can immediately recognize that Coke is available here. So we can easily relate that to the Coca-Cola company. So that is the symbolic language we can make use of. And last one is the feedback. Feedback is the essential component of both personal, interpersonal and impersonal communications. So prompt feedback permits the sender to reinforce, to change or to modify the message to ensure that it is understood in the intended way. Because feedback is the only way wherein sender will be able to know, means in what particular way the receiver has received the message. If at time on after receiving the feedback, if the sender feels that the wrong message is being conveyed to the receiver, then they can immediately modify the message and resend the message to the receiver. Now, next is the elements in communication process. We just finished discussing the components, the various, the main components of the communication process. Now we'll be discussing the elements in communication process. So in total, there are 9 elements. It is the sender, encoding, message, media, decoding, receiver, noise, and feedback. Okay? And response. So all these are the 9 elements of communication that we'll be discussing one by one in the day. So communication can be used in many forms. It can be written or spoken, by body language, by pictures, illustration, by company logo. It acts as a bridge between the purchaser and the seller. Communication is a very wide term. It can take in its preview both external communication and internal communication. Now we'll discuss these external communication and internal communication after discussing these 9 elements. So the first one is the sender. So sender is, just now we discussed that sender is the person who initiates the message. So they basically design a particular message that they want to convey to their receiver. So in case of the marketing communication, sender is the manufacturer of the product. So they are the one who wants to communicate with their consumer. They are the one who wants to highlight the importance of their product to their consumers. So they may make use of any means verbal message or the non-verbal message. So these two are the major parties to the communication, sender and receiver. So receiver is a person whom the message is intended or aimed. The degree to which the decoder understands the message is dependent upon various factors such as knowledge of recipient, their responsiveness to the message, and the reliance of encoder on decoder. So now what happens when sender sends the message, it is being encoded by the sender. Okay, then the message is being sent to the media. So now when receiver receives the message, they decode the message that is being encoded by the sender, and then they receive the information. So now what message they receive depends upon how they decode the message. Okay, if they decode exactly in the way it was encoded, so they'll receive the exact information. Otherwise, the message that they'll receive will be quite different from the way it was sent by the sender. So now how they decode the message depends upon their knowledge. and their responsiveness to the message. Sometimes if we watch the advertisement in a hurry, so we may perceive it wrongly. So means it always depends upon the level of involvement of the receiver at the time of receiving the message and the knowledge of that particular recipient. Now the next element is message and the channel. So these are two communication tools that are being used. Sender is sending the message and that through the various media. Now, what is a message? Message is a key idea that the sender wants to communicate. So this is the actual information that the sender wants to convey to the receiver. It is a sign that elicits the response of the recipient. Communication process begins with deciding about the message to be conveyed. It must be ensured that the main objective of the message is clear. So while designing message, it should be kept in mind that the message, the main objective of sending message should be clear. Next is the channel or the media. These are the way you convey your message. So the channels include verbal media such as telephone or face-to-face conversations, as well as the non-verbal modes such as email or the text messages. Each individual channel has its own strengths and weaknesses in terms of communication. So we'll do media in much detail later on in the next unit when we'll be doing media planning. There we'll be discussing what are the various medias that we can use for advertising the product. What are the strengths and weaknesses of each of the media? Because each of the media have their own pros and cons where that should be kept in mind while deciding on the media. For example, written medium is chosen when a message has to be conveyed to a small group of people, while an oral medium is chosen when spontaneous feedback is required from the recipient, as misunderstandings are cleared then and there. So, means in between the verbal and the non-verbal medium, we could choose it for different reasons. So when we want the feedback, immediate feedback, then we can go for using the verbal medias. Otherwise, we can go for the non-verbal medias. Now, encoding, decoding, and feedback. Encoding, decoding, and feedback are and response. These are some other elements apart from these four. Encoding, these are the major communication functions that are being required. So encoding is the process whereby the information you would like to communicate gets transferred into a form to be sent and decoded by the receiver. So basically whatever message we want to send, that will be converted into a form that is acceptable to the receiver. Decoding is done on the receiving end. So decoding is a stage. It is equally important as encoding. Communication can go downhill at this stage if the receiver is not practicing active listening skills, or if they do not possess enough information to accurately decode the message. So all the efforts being put in by sender will waste if the receiver is not able to decode the message in the correct manner, because the way they decode the message depends upon their listening skills and on the basis of the information they have. So if they are not able to decode the message properly, then the whole communication process will fail. Now the response. The listening stage, wherein the listener provides verbal or non-verbal reactions to what they hear. So response is something based on how they decode the message. So this in case of advertising, this response could be spontaneous, or it could happen after a gap of time. So it will not always happen that immediately on watching the advertisement, we'll buy that product. So let's say there we are watching the advertisement of a car. We may make up our mind that in future, whenever we'll buy this particular car. So that is the kind of response. So just making up your mind to buy that car in future is the kind of response that is being given to the message conveyed through the advertisement. Now, feedback. Feedback is the main component of communication process as it permits the sender to analyze the efficacy of the message. So this is one component that will tell the sender how effective the communication process was. It helps the sender in confirming the correct interpretation of message by the decoder. So sender will be able to know that the receiver has been able to correctly decode the message that was sent to them in the encoded form. Feedback may be verbal, so or it could be non-verbal. So verbal by verbal means a spoken or in the written form, and by non-verbal we mean it could be in the form of a smile. Okay, it could be in a form of a frown. If person smiles, that means they are happy with the message that is being conveyed to them. If they get angry, that means they don't like the message that was being conveyed to them. So this feedback can also take the form of memos or reports. Now, the last element in the communication process is the noise. So noise is the last system which interferes with the intended communication. So this noise is the kind of distortion or disruption that interferes with the transformation of interpretation of information from sender to receiver. So now this noise can greatly influence the way a message is being conveyed to the receiver. So it refers to influences on effective communication that influences the interpretation of conversations. So while often looked over, communication noise can have a profound effect both on our perception of interactions with others and analysis of our own communication proficiency. Now, what is the noise? So noise is any kind of distraction. Let's say, means the advertising is being given during a particular program. So people are more interested in watching the program and they are not interested in watching the advertisement. What they'll do? So they'll switch on the TV to some other channel. So they'll move away from that channel to some channel in between the advertisement. So this is a kind of noise. So the people will receive the message only if they get exposed to the message, but this noise will cause the distraction. So that way they will never receive the message that was sent to them. So now this noise factor can greatly influence the way the message is being received by the receiver. Is it clear, students?
Can you elaborate more to the noise?
So noise is like when
Like one example.
okay, with it, in case of advertising, what happens when advertising is given in the newspaper? So most of the times, you see that when advertising is given on the newspaper, so most of the times it is a one-page advertisement, a one large on the title page. Why it happens? So this is to avoid the noise, to avoid the distraction. Because if most of the font used for printing the news on the newspaper is very small.
Hmm.
So if we give the advertisement in the similar font or in the columns, because generally news are given in the columns, in the small columns, and in a very small font. If it is given in the same font and that too in the columns, then people will never be able to recognize that this is the advertisement. So
it should be in that way so it attract the people.
so means that means that if we follow the similar pattern, people will think that this is a news. They'll never give attention to that particular advertisement. So this is the noise factor. This is the something that can cause distraction. So that's why whenever advertising is being given on the newspapers, the some different pattern is being followed so that it is being highlighted, so that it is being highlighted and people it is being noticed by them. Yes, this is different from the news and this is the advertising. Is it clear now?
यस मैम, लाइक हमारे मैसेज जो भी हम सेंड कर रहे हैं वो किस बात से होके मतलब कैसे कैसे हर्डल से होके जा रही हैं, वो अच्छे से रिसीव्ड हो रही हैं कि नहीं, वो चीज है
हाँ,
नॉइज.
yes, in case of this means now I'm communicating with you, the network problem could be there that can cause the noise, that can cause the distraction. If the network means if the internet connectivity is bad in some particular area, then that student will never be able to listen to me clearly. So they may miss some parts of the lecture. So they will not receive the complete information. So that is a noise factor that can happen. So it could be a technical error, it could be a mechanical error, it could be anything that distracts the information to be conveyed to the receiver.
And ma'am, feedback and response like
Being done for the intermediaries. So because if the wholesalers, retailers or the agents or the middlemen that are working in between the manufacturer and the customers, if they are not aware of the features of the product, they will never be able to sell it adequately to the customers because they are not having the right information. So means product catalogs are being designed and that are being sent to the retailers regularly. Sometimes the message in the advertising is not for the final consumers but for the wholesalers or retailers. So this target market could be the government agencies. So there are many government agencies who are working for the betterment of society. Sometimes the messages could be designed in such a way, means all the social advertising is done for these causes. Let's say these days you are seeing the advertising on the television to get yourself vaccinated um, against the COVID-19. So that is the message being conveyed by the government agency. So here the means the target market would be the complete society. So then the target market could be the companies. So sometimes the message is not intended for the customers, but for the competing or non-competing companies, so that they can get the idea what the company wants to convey to them. So this is the external communication. Next is the internal flow. Internal flow is a flow of communication inside the organization with various departments, for example, finance, production, human resource department, etc. All marketing function including research, innovation, development, packing, branding, and production, which has to be of good quality as desired by the customer for his satisfaction. So if whatever we are communicating to our customers, if we are not communicating it inside the organization, our employees who are working to make product for the satisfaction of customers, if they are not aware of something that is being conveyed to customers, they'll not be able to make the product that is required by the customer. So means some communication has to be there inside the organization also. So the communication that is happening inter-department or from top to bottom is the internal flow of communication, and this is also important. So the external flow of communication is basically something that forms the marketing communication. So this is basically the marketing communication, and this is just the simple communication that is taking place inside the organization. Now we'll discuss the various types of communication. Communication can be of many types. It could be personal communication, which is the communication between two or more persons on a personal level. Apart from the this personal type of communication, we can categorize the communication into formal, informal, upward, downward, verbal, non-verbal, body language, mass communication, organizational communication, interpersonal communication, integrated marketing communication. So in marketing communication, mass communication is used. So whenever we say that means marketing communication, so marketing communication is always a mass communication. It is not done with one particular person or one or two customers. So for marketing communication, the message is being conveyed to the message. So already I have told you earlier also that advertising is a message that is being conveyed to lakh of people in one go. So always in marketing communication, the purpose is to convey the message to the masses. So marketing communication could be the advertising, publicity, sales promotion, personal selling, direct marketing. So all these are the form of marketing communication. Mass media used can be through newspapers, magazines, hoardings, radio, television, cinema, transit media, okay, all the moving media. So the messages that are being means pasted or that are being written on buses, taxis, or metros are the transit medias. So